Welcome to Backstage with the Brand, where we stage dive into all things advertising, marketing, and branded content. I'm your host, Andy Weedland, and today I'm joined by two guests. I'm thrilled to welcome Andrew Gillman from the Utah Department of Tourism, and I'm also happy to have my friend and colleague, Rachel Jean Furchow, who is the travel lead at Nativo. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Andy. Really glad to be here.
Welcome, Rachel.
Thanks, Andy. I'm excited to chat with you both.
So, Andrew, you spent the majority of your career persuading us to get off the couch and visit beautiful Utah. And you're currently Director of Creative Content for the Utah Office of Tourism. But you've done web strategy, and you're a communications guru, and you're a writer, and a photographer, and a marketer. All pretty much your entire career is basically convincing people to get out to Utah. Is that correct?
I'd say that's a pretty fair summary, actually. Yes.
And Rachel, you're the travel lead at Nativo, who's the sponsor of this podcast. But you also have many lives. You're a travel influencer. You're the principal of Rachel Off Duty, where you share stories, photos, and videos. And you're not just a travel influencer, you're actually a focus group of one because you've returned from Utah, I think yesterday?
Yes, it was my sixth trip to Utah, my first time in south of Utah. So I would consider myself a big fan. And I eat, sleep, and breathe travel as well.
Well, you're a perfect co-host for the show, given your recent travels. So let me lay out the agenda for our listeners, and then we'll jump into the questions. First, we're going to talk about storytelling and content, because that's Andrew's expertise. We're going to figure out how storytelling and content inspire people to travel and explore. And then we're going to get out into the economics and measurement of getting people to visit Utah and other destinations. And then I want to talk about audience targeting and personas. And then finally, we are thankfully coming out of COVID. And I want to take a look back and see what we've learned and how we've become better marketers because of it. Sound good?
Awesome.
That's great.
So I wanted to dive in first and foremost to really talk about content and the storytelling aspect of Utah, which is, I know, something that, Andrew, you are the expert in. And your group has been described as the storytelling wing of the state of Utah. Can you talk a little bit more about that and tell us about your strategy over the years?
Yeah, of course. I suppose I'm a little biased in this regard, as this really is the foundation of the work of the content team that I work with. Storytelling, but of course, storytelling is central to marketing and to our brand, and as we're part of the Governor's Office of Economic Development, soon to be Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. We have this responsibility not only to tourism, but to the larger economy in the ways that it really intersects with some of the quality of life factors, workforce development, housing, issues like air quality and water use. So, a lot to think about. And at the heart of all that is this really intense passion for this place, right? Among residents, among people who know and love Utah. And that's really both long time as well as recent transplants, or people who have traveled regularly to Utah like yourself. And in recent years, we've increasingly come to share this place with travelers from around the world. Even as we've kind of shifted our mindset away from purely destination marketing with more of a destination management mindset, wherein we're able to emphasize helping communities develop new product to benefit them, to create a stronger visitor economy. I think storytelling remains a really critical core component of that. And that I set that all up as a lead into this is how we created our Red Emerald strategic plan. Originally in 2017, we launched this plan. It is named after a gem that is commercially mined only in Utah, so something that is rare, distinct to Utah, only can be found here. And when we relaunched it in 2019, we did so with stakeholder input from around the state. We wanted to make sure that everybody was buying into this story that we're trying to tell. And one of the initiatives that really emerged from that 2019 relaunch was to establish ourselves as leaders in responsible visitation, messaging, as well as education. This is something that really began with a PR initiative we called How to Utah, and it's evolved into something that's now all-encompassing throughout our brand, which we're calling Forever Mighty. And for those who are familiar with the Mighty Five in Utah, you should see a relationship there. We're certainly calling out the Mighty Five, but it's also the statewide mindset, and it's built on these pillars of supporting local, of engaging with the community, of protecting our cherished places, of diversity and inclusivity, of gratitude, absolutely, of appreciation for place, and then, of course, some of the leave no trace and tread lightly principles of outdoor recreation that you would associate with an initiative like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about a lot of things that I know Andy and I really want to get into. So that's great. And thanks for breaking that down. And before we get into all of that, I kind of want to start out and just paint a picture for people that are listening to this because, we talked about this. I'm, of course, a Utah fan. I've been several times, and I know firsthand how beautiful the state is, right? And there's tons of amazing landscapes. There's a lot of tangible reasons to visit Utah. There's also, I'm sure, an intangible sort of, feeling that you get when visiting the state. When a newbie visits Utah, what do you believe or what do you know that they might get out of this visit that they wouldn't get if they went somewhere else, like to a beach or a cruise or like a Broadway show? What sets Utah apart?
Right, right. I would my own journey to really understanding this question, I would say, began in grad school. I worked with a couple of professors who really introduced me to this place-based literature, environmental literature, and it set me on this path to like a deeper appreciation for where I live. I'm certainly happy to share some of those texts with you if you're interested, but a couple that come to mind are Steve Trimble's Sagebrush Ocean, Terry Tempest Williams' Red, which very much illuminates the red rock of southern Utah. John McPhee's Basin and Range, that's all about the West Desert. And I'll say, and I should say that I'm a little embarrassed by the fact that I've only recently begun to decolonize my bookshelf, as they say, to really expose myself to more indigenous writers. Recently, I've been reading some fantastic Go Shoot stories, which is a tribe that whose ancestral lands covered the territory where the Okra Mountains are, which are just west of Salt Lake City, where I live, all the way west across the Great Basin into Nevada. So there's a lot of great stories about this place. And all this points to diversity of geography, right? I mentioned the Great Basin. I mentioned the Red Rock of southern Utah. Add in the Rocky Mountains of northern Utah, and you have these three physiographic provinces. These are unique geographic areas that Utah is at the confluence of. It's a pretty unique circumstance in the United States, and it brings a lot of diversity of outdoor recreation, of landscapes. It's really everything but an ocean shoreline. And within that, you get, this great arid high country desert. We have powerful western rivers. We have big reservoirs like Lake Powell and Flaming Gorge. And one thing I want to just drop in here is with our elevation, with that aridity, comes some of the best dark sky viewing in the developed world. You have less atmospheric distortion. You're able to really go after seeing the Milky Way. We have 23 accredited dark sky places and more locations coming, free from light pollution, free to have that experience, which is so fantastic. Hopefully you had a chance to stay up and see some of that while you were out here. But I think I would boil it down to that diversity of experience.
Andrew, I'd love to talk about your media mix and how you use different mediums and tactics for generating awareness, consideration, and planning. Because, like, you got Rachel through the funnel, and I'm at the beginning of the funnel. And so, talk about how you use banners or content or TV to get people interested and aware, and then consider, and then planning, and then eventually visiting Utah.
Sure, sure. So, in terms of a media mix, I would say that we really do model Google's See, Think, Do, Care framework, which we've adapted for travel in our media buying, and are able to kind of toggle among those four categories based on the campaign message or the desired outcome. So, awareness, of course, at the top of that funnel, that's going to be a priority for us, though arguably through a very different lens than when Utah was buying for attention as a destination in 2012 and 2013 when we launched the Mighty Five. Now the Mighty Five, they really have this life of their own, and social media and independent content creators are out there telling this story. would not be surprised to find that Rachel has blogged about the Mighty Five and has an
Yeah.
audience who is discovering that through her rather than through us. So you think about other places in the funnel. Now we're focusing on refining our message to advance the goals of Red Emerald and of Forever Mighty. So certainly awareness still at the see and think stages, but filtered through those goals. The action, I think, really takes place at the do and care stage, and that is to create, better informed travelers. Even some retargeting with follow-up messages, encouraging people who have either looked at our content or in some cases who have booked a trip to Utah to encourage those people to read through some additional material to better inform their travel planning. So you mentioned some of the mix banners. They absolutely do still play a role. I think that surprises some people, but we're a visual product. We can introduce people to Utah through images that really resonate and capture your imagination. And these, along with a mix of compelling, connected, and addressable TV buys, storytelling partnerships in the custom endemic space, social media advertising, public relations, and then, of course, the kind of content marketing that we do with native partners like Nativo. This all generates exposure for us. And in some cases, we are explicitly driving traffic to visitutah.com, where we can help those visitors plan and prepare. But in other cases, that deeper storytelling itself might create a booking action, and it can do so while imparting that responsible travel message we want to get across. In fact, I'd say native buys, like we do with Nativo, have been some of the most powerful drivers of traffic to our website. And knowing that fact means we're wanting to be very thoughtful and strategic about how we use that medium.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on this, but I want to just talk a little bit more about this because, of course, when it comes to travel, which is a very interesting funnel, right? We're not just purchasing a product and having that be it. It's about, the pre-planning, the experiencing, and the reflecting afterwards, which you mentioned a little bit, right? And there's sort of this axiom in travel specifically that you need at least 7 touch points to spur an action. Some might say even more. I think that there's actually a lot more that goes into this, at least digitally, right? What would you say is the consumer or customer journey for Utah travel? And how are you kind of plugging these different facets of your digital plan into those steps along the way?
Right, right. In terms of the customer journey, there are so many ways to encounter a brand these days. Certainly more than 7, right? All of our paid marketing remains critically important for remaining front of mind for sustaining or growing our share of voice. You add social and earned media activity nationally, locally, even in some international markets we might talk about later. I think you always hope that people are organically thinking of and considering our destination and will follow your kind of ideal journey to booking by dropping into your website, learning how to plan that responsible regional trip with multiple nights in one area to really deeply engage, or in some cases, right, see all 5 national parks in 6 days. Because sometimes you just have to, take that road trip of your dreams. And I think while that certainly happens, you'll hear stats that people will visit upwards of 100 sites on their travel planning journey. And while seeing that stat can kind of scare you off, I think during the pandemic, we saw some surveys that state DMO and governmental destination sites like ours actually became among the most trusted sources of information. People really turned to sites like ours to get the information that they needed to be able to understand how to plan a trip. And we took that responsibility very seriously, right? We put forward the most current COVID-19 transmission information, safe travel practices. We wanted to be sure that there was just enough proactive effort to be in front of those visitor concerns. And it ended up creating one of the most powerful portals into planning a trip to Utah during this pandemic.
So I guess since I'm planning on going to Utah, I've done a deep dive into some of your content, and it's the way I sort of break it out
Great.
is like some of it is itineraries and inspiration, like what I'm going to do there, and then some of your content is really specific about a specific persona. So, like if you're into making chocolate, or if you're into conquering mountains with disabilities, it's more persona based marketing rather than itinerary based marketing. What's the balance? What works best for you guys?
It really is a balance. I think that when we first started to be content creators, this goes back several years now, when people used to say and still say content is king, we were looking at the different kinds of travelers who would arrive at our website and try to meet them where they are in the travel funnel, or where they are in their inspiration, where they are in their logistical needs. So it is a combination of those things. We publish a lot of articles and have tried to build a reputation as a publisher in some ways in many ways, without necessarily relying on paid dollars behind all of those stories, because we value stories so much. But we also recognize that everyone is not a reader, right? That people consume content in different ways. They have different needs. And sometimes being able to grab an itinerary that's concrete, or at least provides enough framework to help you understand the way that a Utah trip can fit together. It's a big state, right? There's a lot to see. There's a lot to potentially do. And sometimes you just need a little bit of help. And I'd say thirdly, I mentioned logistics. We feel like planning resources are really important. You may know that you're coming to Utah. You may even know where you're going, but you may not have hiked at elevation before, right? If you're experiencing a hike at 4,000 feet, 6,000 feet, if you're up at Cedar Breaks National Monument, hiking at 10,000 feet above sea level for the first time, it's a very different experience than when you're hiking at sea level. And that's something we want to prepare people for.
Do you, let me just, like, I used to work at BuzzFeed, and BuzzFeed quizzes blew up like 10 years ago, this idea of
Right.
interaction where if Rachel and I took a quiz, she would be like the cool traveler, like in a van and stuff. And then like, I would be like the worst traveler at like the Four Seasons or something. Is there a way that you could use interactivity to break out personas and then market to us differently? Are you at that stage, or are you still a publisher publishing great information and letting the consumer decide what's right for them?
I'd say that we are pushing in that direction. I think that through some of the engagement that we're able to achieve in some of our customer facing channels, predominantly social media, but we also have a chat service on visitutah.com through Intercom, where we're able to engage with people and help them to craft an itinerary, or to shape their vacation, or to even nudge their behavior or their mindset. I would say from a technology standpoint, though, one of the things we did last year was we relaunched visitutah.com with a fantastic partner in Hanson Dodge, to create a scenario with the technology platform where we're able to do more personalization, more customization of content. We have the foundation in place now to do that. We're currently in the process of doing some of the user research, setting up new website KPIs to understand what will provide the best user experience for visitors in that space, because we don't want to jump into personalization without having some sense that that's providing value for our visitors. Interactivity, I think we've worked with some partners who have supported that. We worked with Expedia and Jebbit to create a landing page where people were able to take a BuzzFeed-esque quiz, and at the end of that, it would push them out to kind of a red emerald destination. Here again, to sort of suggest, you're thinking about coming to Utah, you're thinking about seeing red rocks, you want to go on a hike, really look closely at Dead Horse Point State Park.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I feel like if I took that kind of a quiz, I would be all over the place, because my interest in Utah is very broad, and I will do just about anything and everything except for ski.
Oh,
And your team at Lovecom actually knows this very well. I almost died trying to ski for the first time in Park City, so I know that's not for
oh wow.
me. I'm very much a hiker. I'm being dramatic. I just like I've never been on skis in my life until 2 years ago, and it's a feat. I commend anyone that can ski and shred and do all of that cool stuff. I am jealous. Um, one of the things, so I know we talked about personas, and we talked about, being conscious of the different types of travelers, their different interests, but above all of that, what has been, in your opinion, or based on the data, what has been your most successful piece of content ever in your
Mm,
career, and why?
mm. Right, and the question about what makes a piece of content successful certainly informs my response. I would say some of our campaign landing pages that are among our most visited are certainly worth looking at. You'd look at the Mighty Five or Get More Mountain Time, which was our more recent ski campaign, along with key pages like Zion National Park or Utah ski resorts. But I feel like taking all those success factors together and combining them, I actually might look at some of our itineraries as some of the more successful pieces of content because they definitely attract attention through paid social, and that's domestic and international. We find them to be really helpful in our international markets. They also show really strongly in search engine marketing. So, of course, Google Ads or SEO, as well as just being organically discoverable. And what I'll point to was really recent, maybe not, well, excuse me. What I'll point to that we launched in 2016 with the designation of Bears Ears National Monument was the Bears Ears Starter Kit. And this we supported with a native buy, paid social, definitely organic, because it was a very timely piece of content that supported this designation that got a lot of attention, right? Positive, negative. It was a little bit it remains quite controversial. And following year, when that monument saw its boundaries reduced, we just felt an even more amplified need to make sure that the itinerary was doing the work that it needed to inform visitors who knew what Bears Ears was, but needed a lot of help to understand how to experience. That's a piece of content that I think really jumps out.
Yeah, and just for anyone listening, can you explain a little bit about what Bears Ears is?
Sure. So Bears Ears National Monument is a remarkable collection of archaeological sites, of petroglyph and pictograph panels, of ancestral Native American lands that are also experienced and considered home by something like 5 contemporary tribes who share this space, who consider it part of their present day, and who have a intense personal relationship with the land. And I should say it's throughout southeastern Utah, so very near the Four Corners region, which will be much more familiar to your listeners, as well as Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park, or even Natural Bridges National Monument is down in that area. So a really remarkable landscape. It's a remote landscape. There are some small towns with residents who are really passionate about that area. But because it is remote, because it is not as hardened over as we might say about some of our national parks, it does require a little bit more of extra planning to experience well and to experience responsibly.
So I think you bring up a great point, and I know I specifically worked with your team on promoting Bears Ears a couple years back, and I remember how successful and how poignant that was, and how timely it was. And this is kind of what I think makes Utah so interesting, because you have these beautiful vistas, these beautiful landscapes that everybody wants to visit, but then layered on top of that, you have these petroglyphs, you have this Native American history, you have these special lands that people also need to visit with respect, right? So what is the balance between that inspiration, Utah is a beautiful place, and that responsibility of visiting it well and making sure that you are respecting that aspect of it in a way that is mindful and thoughtful and ultimately, responsible.
I feel like we hope that inspiration and responsibility are not mutually exclusive ideas. I do think that Utah has a lot of opportunity as a destination to unite around some of the sustainable travel practices and product offerings. But what we do know is that our wide open spaces and access to outdoors and outdoor recreation, all of this reached new levels during the pandemic, including introducing a number of new people to these experiences, people who are experiencing the outdoors for the first time. And that swell of interest came with a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunity. What we don't want to be are gatekeepers. And we have to recognize that people from different backgrounds and life experiences are going to experience what we have to offer in a range of ways, sometimes different from how we might experience those places. So I'd say it's my hope that we can really help as many visitors as possible feel prepared for how to safely and responsibly visit Utah, so we can potentially develop new generations of ambassadors of our place and help create a conversation among other content creators and visitors to make sure that we're all on the same page.
So let's shift from storytelling to economics. Let's go from right brain to left brain. What are the economics of the Utah tourism program? Like, how do you guys get funded? And then how are you measured on, okay, like we gave Andrew all this money. Was it a net benefit for the state of Utah?
Yeah, so we are funded legislatively through a resource called the Tourism Marketing Performance Fund, or TMPF. It's created and it's appropriated marketing dollars from the state general fund. It used to be based on our ability to sort of increase sales tax revenue for any number of tourism related activities. That fund has since plateaued, and we kind of hit a cap, and the fund increase has reached a sunset. So now we have ongoing funding, ongoing appropriation from the legislature, and we, of course, so much appreciate that fund and the governor's confidence in our work.
Backstage with the Brand is proudly sponsored by Nativo. Nativo is architecting the future of advertising with the world's most advanced platform for content. For advertisers, Nativo enables brand storytelling at scale. For publishers, Nativo provides monetization with seamless and engaging ad formats. Together, Nativo's platform creates a better form of advertising. To learn more, visit nativo.com.
This is something that is an interesting concept that I don't think everyone understands, in that when you are thinking about the success of your tourism initiatives and your marketing initiatives, how do you calculate your return on visitor spending?
Always the challenge of any DMO to make sure that we're getting, the return on our investment, particularly as it comes to the expenditure of taxpayer resources. So we run SMARI, ad effectiveness studies, on every campaign. So that's strategic marketing and research. Questions like, did they see the ads? Did they visit? How much did they spend? And with that, we're able to do some kind of as needed brand perception questions. It might be additional demographics or responsible travel questions. In some cases, we're able to track bookings from participating hotels through the Adara platform. That shows us all observable bookings. We're also able to make some really excellent guesses on enriched earnings, so get a pretty good picture about how people are actually spending money. Earlier, I mentioned those KPIs on visitutah.com. We have kind of a new generation of KPIs, which are meant to reflect a range of visitor needs on our site. This includes some really high intent to travel measures, such as downloading our travel guide or visiting the itinerary pages, right? It also recognizes that people may get what they need from our website by just visiting a single page. And lastly, I'll say we always appreciate when we're able to get brand lift studies from partners like yourself, as we're running, pre-roll through YouTube or any other kind of media buying activity where we're able to go back and survey people and see if they encountered our marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that I actually also wanted to ask on this specific topic, and this can be more macro, it doesn't have to be specific to Utah, but I think one of the big discussions, at least for the tourism industry, especially in the past year, was this sort of understanding that tourism success is not or shouldn't just be about volume of visitation. When it comes to how tourism boards are adapting in a post COVID world, and the idea of building back better and having more responsible travel, what do you think personally? What do you think needs to change in order for tourism to be a more responsible industry, and how is that measured?
Yeah, this is this question has been at the heart of our Red Emerald strategic plan, in that we have a lot of built-in responsibility to our industry, which has seen a lot of success in recent years, to the point that we've had, local and national media look really closely at some of the pressures that puts on communities or on natural places as interest in Utah has increased and visitation has followed. So with that challenge, we've taken on the responsibility of figuring out how to change the way that people think about their trip. That might include, we've talked about regional travel. We haven't talked about hiring guides or local outfitters to take you to a place where you may not otherwise have been able to access safely on your own, to experience a place more deeply, more intimately, to see it through the lens or through the eyes of that expert who most knows that place and who can help you gain a greater appreciation for it. Through distributing travelers to places through coordinated content, right? Through storytelling, by getting people to our website in a way that helps them expand their thinking about their trip. It's a pretty big portfolio of possibility and something that's daunting, and we haven't figured out how to measure everything. But I think it will remain a central question for us in the years to come.
Let me ask a question about your audience and put you on the spot. Like, what are your best customers? The people that spend the most, or the people that are the most respectful and use local resources to enjoy their visit?
Yeah. International travelers are honestly fantastic customers as it comes to the longer stay, higher spend trips. Ski travelers are also in that demographic, and as you might expect, are more affluent. But we can talk about the challenges that reality creates for the ski industry in its future. I would say that I don't want to leave out middle or lower income visitors from the equation, because there's so much opportunity to inspire visitation and create those lifelong ambassadors I mentioned earlier, who return to favorite places or explore new destinations. And then with that, more recently, I mentioned we're really focusing on those drivers of dispersion, and a quote quality visitor. It really would be that individual or that family who we feel like is seeking out those guides and outfitters locally to help them explore more, who are going out of their way to support local businesses, local restaurants, even shop local, and increasingly people who are looking for ways to give back. You'll hear about regenerative travel now, which is in that realm of people who are seeking to be more in that giver mindset rather than a taker mindset.
I imagine I used to live in Japan, and Japan has these booms, and it's like if for some reason ski Utah is the thing, then it is an absolute phenomenon, and you'll get hundreds of thousands of travelers from Japan. Do you focus on getting the Japan ski market over to Utah? Has that ever been an initiative?
We used to have a direct flight from Tokyo to Salt Lake City. It was one of our few international flights outside of Mexico and Canada that we were able to celebrate. I am not sure if that flight is still running. I will say that with the Olympics coming up, I think we're always looking for opportunities to attract to the Japanese market to Utah. So I think that there are synergies through the lens of really recognizable international experiences like the Olympics, where we're able to position our ski product in front of a not just Japanese audience, but an international audience, because we have the credibility from having hosted the Olympics previously in 2002, and are ambitious to hopefully host them again within the next 10 to 20 years.
We touched on this before, but this is really an audience question. Do you engage in personas? Do you break out potential visitors by country, interest, activity, location? Like how much persona building do you do in Utah?
In my time at the Office of Tourism, have always been driven by personas. They certainly have changed over the years. Most recently, I think we're really gravitating towards this concept of the explorer, which we feel like is probably our primary audience. And I think that connotes and denotes quite a lot right off the bat without even talking about it. Wide open spaces, opportunity to experience outdoor recreation. But within that, we have a subset of travelers too that we want to speak to. For example, achievers, a little bit higher activity type of explorer who might be coming to experience a race in Utah, or who might be coming to backpack or exert themselves more physically in ways above and beyond kind of the traditional explorer. And certainly families. Utah has long positioned itself as a family-friendly destination. And with that, we absolutely do look at the ways that those personas can be appealed to in individual markets. So, might California have a certain, quality of explorer that we can attract versus one from Texas?
So I have a couple of questions also about the Utah audience. But I want to start first because we were talking about personas and the idea of reaching out to explorers versus families versus achievers. How does your team leverage other spokespeople for this in terms of influencers or activists or the outdoor community? How do you incorporate them into engaging these different personas and spotlighting the destination and all of the different facets that encompass the state?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this, Rachel. First, I'll say we work with outstanding partners on contract in J Public Relations and Sparkloft Media and Hanson Dodge, I mentioned on the website, and Struck for our creative, and Love Communications for our media buying and SEM. We have international reps. We have a pool of writers and photographers and directors. It's so much talent to deploy across our brand narrative throughout our multiple channels. But I have to say that one of the realms that I really am most excited about is our ambassador and our influencer program. We're heading into the the second full year of these initiatives, and we're just increasingly looking for these voices to carry the banner of our brand beyond the sort of standard paid social strategy. We define ambassadors as Utah residents, so people who are in-state, who are passionate about the place and can speak to some specific theme or entry point, and they're contracted to work with us on a number of fronts, including a really cool initiative, an IGTV series called Let's Talk Utah. We ran a full season of that, 11 episodes last year, and are about to start producing the second season. On the influencer front, we're bringing influencers in to support our campaigns. We want them to introduce the brand and what we have to offer to their audiences, which is very often new audiences. So to your question, more specifically, we recently invited a couple of influencers in late February, early March, which were our first since before the pandemic set in. And one of them was able to take on this really unique winter in southern Utah message, while another was able to experience skiing for the first time. Oh, and by the way, snow for the first time. This was just a wonderful content creator from California. And in both cases, I think presented for us a really important opportunity to increase equity, diversity, and inclusivity within our storytelling, which, not to go too far off topic, but last summer amidst the protests following the killing of George Floyd, we really committed to listening more and then doing more out of that process. And we're so thrilled and humbled when we're able to work closely with these creators to identify stories that are meaningful to them and to their audience.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the person you're talking about, Francesca, is one of my friends.
Oh, Francesca?
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I loved what she did. Was she the one who learned how to ski for the first time?
Yes.
She and I are like hand in hand with that, with California. Yeah, that's amazing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, she's wonderful. Super, super talented.
We loved her work, and so thrilled that she was able to work with us.
Yeah, I was talking to her about Park City and all, and she was giving me South Utah tips. So I was like, cool. Um, so you talked about diversity. You talked about listening and really, just tapping into the need to be more diverse and the need to be really listening to the different audiences and people from different walks of life that come to your state and visit Utah. I want to also ask how does that representation play a role in Utah's marketing, specifically when we think about Native nations and Native American perspective and destination, marketing for the state? How do you work with the nations that call Utah home?
Yeah, I cited a few white writers earlier who were so influential in my understanding and appreciation of this place that I call home and that I love to travel through. But we can't let that canon of literature safeguard an elitism or an exclusivity, right? As our demographics continue to shift, we all need and want to step up to the challenge of broadening our communications and sense of accessibility. Last summer, we sent out a survey called A Utah for Everyone, and it was to better understand perceptions about Utah as a safe, welcoming, and appealing destination among BIPOC, LGBTQ plus, and people of varying abilities. I mean, to assess their understanding of Utah, as well as just to ascertain some traveler types and interests. I can say that, out of that, I think we performed pretty well overall, although it certainly pointed to some opportunity, right? That especially among a smaller, more diverse cohort of responses, we saw some question marks that we wanted to make sure that we're able to address. And some of that happens just through representation. Some of that happens through more thoughtful conversations. As for our native populations, we have so much opportunity. I think that there are some very small but meaningful steps like land acknowledgements. It was really inspired how at this year's virtual Sundance Film Festival, for example, each film was introduced with a land acknowledgement. I want to give you this example because it's front of mind. We last week posted about Natural Bridges National Monument on Instagram, and we were speaking to how it's the world's first accredited international dark sky park, and we cited these ancestral names of the three primary bridges that make up that monument and how important that place is or was to that ancient culture. One of our collaborators, and is just a really powerful voice for Native people, entered the conversation to call to light that several contemporary tribes also call the area home and possess that special relationship to the place. And that was just truly an oversight in our caption, right? Which we were able to engage with that follower, with that collaborator, and change that caption to reflect that it's not just an ancestral relationship, but it's a very modern living relationship. And we wanted to make sure that that we are attentive to that because it's so much a part of the definition of Utah and our heritage.
So, Andrew, you mentioned COVID and the impact it had on Utah's marketing efforts. And I'd love to get your take on that. But before we do, Rachel, you work with a lot of destination marketing organizations. What kind of impact did COVID have on their efforts, and how do you see them coming out of it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really big question that we could dive into for a full hour on its own, but when it comes to how COVID has impacted the industry, of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw, uh, understandably, a lot of confusion and just a general fear of how are we going to continue to engage with people who might not be traveling right now? How are we going to be able to continue doing the work that we do when nobody's traveling, when funding is down, when, just the general uncertainty of it all is sort of looming overhead? We saw a lot of tourism boards understandably pull back on marketing and reaching out to audiences just to sort of regroup and try to figure out what's next. As the pandemic went on, we did see tourism boards turning to different audiences, right? Turning local, turning to road tripping, reaching out to people within the community as sort of the first and foremost audience that can actually continue to safely travel within their own city or state and continue to represent the destination while international and sort of longer feeder markets or further feeder markets are unable to do so. As this continues to go on, now in our 13th or 14th month, we're starting to see at least in my opinion, we're starting to see a new shift in not just about safety and that sort of message, but now about possibility. There's a lot of ways that travel can be done safely inherently. And just talking about that and showcasing what is still possible, what is open. I think there's a lot of hope now in the past couple of months alone with the vaccine and people starting to understand how much travel there is to be done right now and in a safe and responsible way. So we are seeing sort of this shift back towards engaging with audiences that we used to engage with before COVID, and engaging with international audiences again to start inspiring that future trip. So in a lot of ways, we are sort of coming back to that inspirational, positive travel messaging that we were doing beforehand. But I'd love to know, Andrew, when it comes to Utah, sort of has that sort of shift also rung true on your end? How has COVID impacted the destination for your marketing initiatives?
Well, you said, two things that really resonated with me. One was possibility, and another was hope. And early in the pandemic, I felt like we were, all in the same boat, right? Everyone was struggling to understand what was happening and what the impact was going to be. And it looked pretty bleak. We have some hotel owners, for example, on our board of directors who were looking at the occupancy and were pretty scared. And that, of course, can be extended to the rest of the hospitality industry and those communities that are highly reliant on tourism, especially in some of the rural parts of our state. As we got into our strategy around how to build a recovery out of the pandemic, we established some messages which we were able to deploy to various audiences based on kind of where they were mentally or psychologically within the pandemic. We had a small but mighty message about the small things that we can do to help one another. We had a Here We Heal message about recognizing that open spaces and the outdoors can provide a setting for wellness and a reset. And throughout most of this, Utah has remained as open for business as is safe and practical. And we have really been able to invite travelers who were comfortable traveling, who could, manage their risk by following CDC recommendations, manage risks to themselves and to Utah locals, and to come and experience this place, predominantly drive market, right? People who could get into their cars and drive here. And the result of that is that Utah has fared the pandemic remarkably well. Certainly in some of our urban spaces and some destinations, we still have a lot of recovery to do, right? Occupancy is still low. Conventions, conferences have not returned. But there are a lot of destinations that have, in some regards, seen a recovery and are feeling a lot more optimistic than we were a year ago. And I think the main point that I want to make from this is that as visitors relied on us for information about safe and responsible travel, I think it's our sincere hope that that mindset about travel will persist after the pandemic, that we won't just forget about the safety measures and the more thoughtful travel measures that would make our trip safer and better for everyone, that when we go into planning a trip from here on out, we're pausing to think about, is there anything I should know for myself to make this trip a little bit better?
Well, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, no one would wish COVID on anybody, but I think Utah being adventure and outdoor and safe and wide open is certainly better than trying to promote cruise travel, right? For instance. So, what has COVID taught you that you'll be? I mean, like right now, there's like this incredible pent up demand for people to get out of their house and go visit places. And there's probably some reticence about getting on a cruise or going
Right.
to a convention.
Absolutely.
But has COVID taught you or made you a better marketer in terms of appealing to people that still have concerns but have a great desire to travel?
I think that COVID has made us a better marketer in that when we were first staring down this pandemic and asking questions about what to do, it put us in a position of needing to make the most of a crisis, right? Never let a good crisis go to waste. And it brought together our best creative minds to help us think of the appropriate path forward. And I think what we learned from that is that when we're going into campaign planning in the future, it'll be important to go through some scenarios, some crisis planning, some communication scenarios that will help us reach across audiences in ways that maybe we took for granted before, that people do think about travel differently, that they will have residual concerns or lingering preoccupations, or we might even just extend that to people who are thinking about traveling to Utah and experiencing the outdoors for the first time, that we just need to be more thoughtful and more considerate that people come from very different experiences and psychologies. And I think that the pandemic has invited us to slow down and take the time to think about those scenarios up front.
The last question that I have is a personal one. We talked about how COVID has impacted Utah, how it's impacted marketing, but how has it impacted you on a personal level as a traveler, as a lover of Utah? What sort of lessons have you gleaned from the past 13 plus months?
Well, what have I learned from the pandemic? I don't know that this will be revolutionary, but I think that in-person relationships and in-person experiences really do matter. And I feel like I regret in some regards how little contact I kept with a number of people during the pandemic, because beyond several hours of Google Meet and Zoom calls during the day, and had a hard time sustaining calls or video conferencing in the evenings or weekends. And we took the pandemic really seriously at my house, and so we really have not had those personal experiences, with few exceptions. I think that we don't always know how these things will affect us in the long term. And we weren't willing to be reckless or careless, because I think being able to appreciate this world, this state, to get up, to go outside, to feel inspired, to have the energy not only to get through the day, but to be fully open and present for the transformative power of the outdoors and of nature, all of the brand promises of Utah. These are things that I do not want to take for granted. And I think that that's truer now than before.
Did you get your shots?
Yeah, I'm halfway.
So it's funny because there are hundreds of millions of people going through what you did. After you got your shot, did you have renewed optimism about travel in Utah?
I did, and I can say that I sat down on an outdoor patio with a couple of friends yesterday that I had not seen throughout the pandemic, and for the first time since very early in the pandemic. And it was honestly a little bit anxiety producing, but once I settled in, I was surprised by how rewarding it felt and how good it felt to have that sense of almost normalcy.
Yeah.
On that note of optimism and relief, I think we should wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for joining us on Backstage with the Brand. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and maybe learned a little something. Special thanks to Andrew Gillman from the Utah Office of Tourism, and to Rachel and Nativo, as Nativo architects the future of advertising. If you like today's episode, please consider sharing with a friend, rating the segment, or subscribing to Backstage with the Brand. Thanks for listening, and remember, no matter where you go, there you are.